Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Shiur is Leiluy Nishmat, Daniella, Shaina, Aleha Hashalom Bas Yehoshua, Falik Shiur. Her neshama should have an aliyah, an Allah Yidin Ayashia. At this point, it is appropriate to wish everyone a good Shabbos and a Kasiva v'Chasima Tova, Lashana Tova u'Masuka. Everyone should be written and inscribed for a good, sweet year, filled with brachas and simchas. May Hashem bless us all. We are doing a course. We're studying some of Rashi's commentaries on the weekly parshas that we're learning. In this case, this week, I want to discuss with you an idea that is brought up by Rashi twice in the parsha of Vayechi, in two different contexts, for two different reasons, but it's the same idea. Rashi quotes almost the same words verbatim in two places, and we'll discuss at least some of the ideas in this interpretation and this explanation of Rashi for the next couple of moments. So the first place that I'd like to begin with is actually in the opening parsha, in the opening verse of the parsha, on the words Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, where the Torah tells us that Yaakov lived the last 17 years of his life, the best 17 years of his life in Mitzrayim. There is a commentary, the opening commentary of Rashi, on something that actually, when you study it in the Chumash, you don't necessarily even know what Rashi is referring to. But actually, Rashi picks up on something that isn't nothing to do with the actual words of the verse, but the way Rashi picks up on the way the verse is written in a Sefer Torah. It turns out that the only place in the entire Torah where the Torah goes from one parsha to the next, without any space in between, without a paragraph break, without any more space than there would ordinarily be between two words, is between last week's parsha, Parshas Vayigash, and this week's parsha, Parshas Vayechi. The last word of Parshas Vayigash is Ma'od, Vayifru Vayirbu Ma'od. The Jews, the family of Yaakov, the Torah tells us at the end of last week's parsha, settled in the land of Goshen. They were fruitful, they multiplied, they were exceedingly reproductive. Vayifru Vayirbu Ma'od. That's the end of Parshas Vayigash, and Vayechi begins with the words Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov lived, and this is what's called a parsha stuma, a concealed, a hidden, a closed parsha, in the sense that it is the only two parshas in the Torah where there's no break between the two. And the opening Rashi in the entire parsha discusses this. Why did the Torah not make room? Why is there no opening here? Why is there no break between the two parshas? And Rashi gives two explanations. The first one, Rashi says, is to reflect, is to hint that once Yaakov passed, the real pain, the real affliction, the real suffering of the Jews in Egypt began. And so the Torah chose to close this gap, as if to show that there was no breathing room, there was no psychological space for the Jews their freedom was removed from them, and their liberty was taken away and closed. That's the first one. The second one, Rashi says, is a very famous one. Rashi says the reason why the Torah closed this chapter, in this case, physically closed the chapter, in other words, not close the chapter and go straight into the next chapter without space, the absence of physical room here in the Sefer Torah is a remez that hints to us that Yaakov Avinu wanted to tell his children before his passing when Mashiach was going to come. Bikesh legalois es haketz lebonov. He wanted to reveal the end of time to his sons. V'nistam mimenu, and it was hidden from him. It was concealed from him. It was removed from him. And of course, he couldn't do so. So what Rashi means, again, this is very famous, what Rashi means is that, of course, most of the parsha, Parshas Vayechi, speaks of Yaakov's parting words, his parting blessings to his sons, to all the Shvatim, etc., to his grandsons, as we discussed this morning. But Yaakov wanted to tell them more than he actually ended up telling them. There was something that Yaakov wanted to give his sons before he passed, and that is he wanted to tell them the end of days. He wanted to tell them when it would all be over, when Mashiach would come. And Hashem didn't allow him to do so. In the words of Rashi, v'nishta mimenu, it was concealed from him. It was taken away from him. Hashem removed this from him, so Yaakov couldn't. According to Rashi, that is another reason why the entire Parsha begins without any space. Where we go from Vayigash straight into Parsha, into Vayechi, without even anything more than the regular space that exists between two words. The absence of space, the closed Parsha, if you will, represents that Hashem had removed something from Yaakov, just like there was supposed to be space in the Sefer Torah, and that space was taken away. So Yaakov himself lost something in the Parsha of Vayechi, which he wanted very much to share with his sons, and Hashem removed it from him. What was this? This was Yaakov's, this was information that Yaakov had. Very valuable information, I might add. Yaakov knew the date of the coming of Mashiach. He knew the moment when all of exile would end, when the Jewish people suffering for all eternity would come to an end. He knew the date, he knew the time when this would happen, and he wanted to share it with his sons. And Hashem pulled that away from him. And so that is, according to Rashi, one of the reasons why the Parsha of Vayechi begins without any space before the Parsha. The same idea is repeated by Rashi a little later on in the Parsha, but for a different reason. Again, if you have a Chumash in front of you, you can turn to the beginning of Perek Mem Tes, of chapter 49. Where the Torah says, Vayikra Yaakov el Banav, verse 1, Pasuk Aleph, and Yaakov calls his children together. Well, he calls his children. He calls his sons. Vayomer, and he says, Hey Osfu, gather together, Va'agido lachem, and I will tell you, says Yaakov, Eis asher yikro eschem, that which will happen to you, Ba'achris hayomim, in the end of days. The term Achris hayomim, to this day, is used as a term referring to Mashiach. In Gemara, in Mishnah, in Midrash, definitely, Achris hayomim refers to Mashiach. So Yaakov literally tells his children, gather together, as Yaakov, as he's on his deathbed, he tells his sons, come gather together and I'll tell you what's going to happen to you ba'achris hayomim, what's going to happen to you at the end of days. He tells them again, Pasuk Beis, he kovtzu v'shimu b'nei Yaakov, gather together, listen to me, children of Yaakov, and listen to your father Yisrael, and he goes on to bless them all. But of course, he never makes good on his pledge. He never makes good on his promise, where he told his sons in the first pasuk, gather together and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to you at the end of days. This they never speak about. They never speak about the end of days. So once again, Rashi goes back to the same teaching of the Midrash. And Rashi tells us Yaakov was not engaged in false advertising, right? He wasn't using the bait and switch method here to gather his children together, to get their attention, right? He wasn't dealing with kids who had ADD. He needed to distract them from their smartphones. So he said, hey, everybody come gather together. I'll talk to you about when Mashiach is coming. And then when they gathered together, he said, oh, by the way, Reuven, I don't like what you did, and Shimon and Levi, I don't like what you did, etc. No, again, Rashi says the same thing. Bikesh lagalis esaketz. Yaakov wanted to tell them when Mashiach was going to come. The Shechina left him. So he began to speak about other things. This time Rashi uses the same idea, the same teaching of the rabbis, that Yaakov wanted to tell his children when Mashiach comes, and Hashem didn't allow him. Rashi uses this to explain both why Yaakov told his children to come together so that he could talk to them about what would happen at the end of days, but never actually ends up doing so, never talks about the end of days, just gives them his final word and blessing before he passes. So again, Rashi says he wanted to, but Hashem didn't allow him. This is what's explained in Rashi in our Parsha in two places. Now let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a couple of questions. But here's one of them. You and I, are sitting here and studying this about 3,500 years later, roughly, right? This takes place the year the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim, which according to our tradition is in the year 2448. And now we are 5,781. So we're talking about close to 3,500 years later. Yaakov was a great tzaddik, of course. He was spiritually connected, of course. He had inside information. He wanted to share it with his sons. He wanted to give them the final date of the coming of Mashiach. Now that we've been through 3,500 years of history, looking back, what exactly did Yaakov think? What exactly was Yaakov wanting to tell his sons? That the Jewish people were going to have to wait a minimum of 3,500 years until the coming of Mashiach? That in the year 5,781, we'd still be waiting? That after one Beis HaMikdash and two Beis HaMikdashes, and after the Jews went into one exile and after another, and after the Jews watched one Beis HaMikdash get destroyed and then another, they would still in the year 2020, almost 2021, still be waiting for the coming of Mashiach, hoping and davening and praying to see it every day? What was Yaakov planning to tell his children? That in the process of these 3,500 years of Golus, the Jews would suffer in unspeakable ways? That Paroi was the first in a very, very long and painful line of bloodthirsty anti-Semites who wanted to wipe the Jews off the face of the map? Really? That's what Yaakov wanted to tell his children? Why? Why in heaven's name, if Yaakov knew all of that, would he ever, for the love of God, want to give a piece of information like that to his children? Does he have no pity on his sons? Does he have no mercy on the Jewish people? That they would have to wait this long? We can understand why Hashem told him, that's not a good idea. Don't tell that to the Jewish people. Don't tell that to your sons. We can understand why Hashem removed Yaakov's ability or gave him the message that this was not meant to be and the Jews were not supposed to be. We can understand Hashem's reaction to Yaakov wanting to tell his children when it would all be over. But why in heaven's name would Yaakov even want to tell them or give them a piece of information like that? Seems impossibly difficult to understand. Next question. What would have happened? Let's think this thing through. What would have happened if Hashem had not stopped Yaakov? And Yaakov actually would have looked at his sons and he would have told them, my dear boys, I'm so sorry to tell you, Jewish history is going to be long and bloody. It's going to take a while till Mashiach comes. We're going to have to suffer in Golus in one form or another for thousands of years. What kind of reaction was he anticipating to get from his sons? What was he hoping his sons would do? The Kazatska? What was he hoping his sons would do? Celebrate, dance, say l'chaim, throw a kiddush? Surely they would have become incredibly despondent. And even worse, the sons, because you know how it is with Jews always talk to each other. This information would have gotten around. Even if Yaakov would have told his sons, I'm telling this to you, but don't tell anybody else. It seems impossible to tell something to 12 Jews and hope that the word isn't going to get out, right? You know the definition of, my dear friends, you know the definition of a secret? Something you tell one person at a time. If Yaakov had told all of his sons this secret, this piece of information, Ketz Hayom, in the end of times when Mashiach would come and how long it would take, surely this information would have leaked somewhere, somehow. Someone would have repeated it to somebody, someone would have overheard it. It seems like the Jewish people would have descended into terrible, terrible despair. Even if the Shvatim, even if Yaakov's 12 sons would not have lost hope and heart and would have somehow remained committed, what is the chance that their children would have, or their grandchildren, or their great-grandchildren? At some point, somebody would have said, really, this is an incredibly long journey. Wake me up in 3,500 years when it's all over. What was Yaakov hoping to accomplish with this by telling the children what was going to happen in the future of Jewish history? The whole thing seems so strange. Okay. And if Yaakov somehow did have a good reason, if he did have somehow some kind of good justification for why he felt it was important, surely he must have thought this through. He wasn't acting impulsively. Surely he had some cheshbon, he had some calculation of why he felt that this little tidbit of information would be valuable and would be healthy and would be and is necessary for his sons and his grandchildren and all the Jewish people to know. If there is value in this, then why is Hashem stopping him? The whole thing seems so strange. Yaakov wants to tell his children when Mashiach is going to come. Hashem says no. And by the way, Hashem doesn't tell him you got the wrong date. At no point does Hashem come to Yaakov and say, no, your information is wrong. He doesn't tell him that. He just says, he just removes the information from Yaakov, or Rashi says, the Shechina left him. The Shechina left Yaakov. Hashem's presence left him, from which Yaakov understood that this was not the will of Hashem. And let's ask perhaps the biggest question of them all. Really, Yaakov knew the end of times? Yaakov knew the date when Mashiach was going to come? Isn't this information that only Hashem has? Surely only God knows when Mashiach is going to come, surely. How does any mortal come to possess this type of information? What does this all mean? Here's an insight. You know, of course, that when the Jewish people were sentenced to exile, they were sentenced for 400 years. They were told, Hashem told Avraham Avinu, it's going to be 400 years. In the end, the Jewish people were actually only in Mitzrayim for 210 years. How does 210 years fulfill a decree of 400 years? There are many different ways of doing the calculation. Either the 400 years began when Yitzchak was born, or the 400 years or the 210 years that the Jewish people were in Mitzrayim were so difficult, they suffered so much, that it was 400 years worth, in a qualitative sense, it was 400 years. Be it as it may, after 210 years, the Jewish people left Mitzrayim. Okay. The Gemara tells us, at the time they left Mitzrayim, the initial plan was that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to take the Jewish people straight into Eretz Yisrael. Had Moshe taken the Jews into Eretz Yisrael and built the Beis HaMikdash, the Jews would never have faced another day in exile again. It turns out that it turns out that Hashem had alternate plans. Hashem's vision for Jewish history had different options. It could have gone different ways. And one of the options, one of the possibilities was that Moshe Rabbeinu himself would take the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael directly. In fact, this could have happened without the Jews even having to wait 40 years in the desert. Had the Jewish people not sinned with the spies, had Moshe Rabbeinu not sinned with the rock, had different things not happened, Hashem's initial plan was that the Jewish people would go from Mitzrayim straight into Eretz Yisrael, and there they would build the Beis HaMikdash. They would have been ushered into the final era of what we refer to today as Achrus Hayomim, the end of days, the era of Mashiach, without anything in between. Alas, the Jews did not merit this. The Jews weren't ready. In order for this plan to happen, the Jews needed to have made certain choices. They needed to choose freedom. They needed to choose a life of redemption. They needed to choose to trust in Hashem to go into Eretz Yisrael without questioning, without sending spies, etc. There were certain choices that they needed to make. And the plan was derailed. Hashem allowed for the plan to be derailed, as Hashem allowed many times throughout Jewish history, right? It's not for now, but the same is true with Adam Rishon, right? If Adam Rishon had not eaten from the Eitz Hadas, also history would have evolved differently. It's very much part of our belief in that Hashem has different options for how history can evolve in many cases, depending on what we choose. But definitely one of the options was that the Jewish people would go from Mitzrayim straight into Eretz Yisrael, where they would live in an eternal state of the coming of Mashiach forever. In fact, it's even more than that. Although Hashem told Avraham Avinu that the Jewish people had to be in Mitzrayim, had to be in a foreign land, for 400 years, had the Jews merited, they didn't have to go through a golus of 400 years. They could have abbreviated, just as they only were in Mitzrayim for 210 years, they could have abbreviated the process further, and they could have ended up leaving Mitzrayim even earlier than anticipated. There was a purpose, there was a spiritual purification that Mitzrayim had to achieve, which the Jews could have fast-tracked, and they could have gotten there faster. According to this, Yaakov had absolutely no intention of telling his children that they were going to be left in exile for 3,500 years. According to this, Yaakov's message to his sons, when the Medrash says, Yaakov wanted to reveal the end of time to his children, it doesn't mean that he wanted to tell them that in 2020 we'd still be sitting in Golus. No, not in the least bit. So what did Yaakov want to do? Yaakov wanted to light a fire under the chair of his children and to tell them that they had options. Yaakov wanted to gather his children around his deathbed and tell them the future of the Jewish people is in your hands. You guys will decide. You'll decide whether you'll go from Mitzrayim into Eretz Yisrael or whether you'll die in the desert. You'll decide whether you'll go into Eretz Yisrael eternally or temporarily. You'll decide whether the first Beis HaMikdash will be the final redemption, whether the second Beis HaMikdash will be the final redemption. You'll decide how long you'll be in Golus. If you make the right choices, Yaakov wanted to tell his sons, you can be out of here even before the 400 years that Hashem said. And if God forbid you don't, and if God forbid you get caught up in the slave mentality, if you get wrapped, if you start to see yourselves as slaves, and you choose slavery, if you don't trust in Hashem when Hashem says, let's go into Eretz Yisrael, if you choose to send spies and challenge Moshe Rabbeinu, etc., then the Golus is going to drag out, and maybe drag out for a very long time. Because Yaakov wanted to reveal the end of times. Yaakov isn't God. Yaakov wanted to tell his children not one date that would be the only date upon which Mashiach could come, and that would be the end of it. Yaakov wanted to give his children the most powerful message that a father can ever tell his children. Yaakov wanted to tell his children, your destiny is in your own hands. You'll decide. At the end of the day, when the time of your redemption will arrive, you will determine. Will you leave Mitzrayim or will you not? Will you choose slavery or freedom? Will you go into Eretz Yisrael? Will you trust the word of Hashem that the land is flowing with milk and honey? Or will you not trust the word of Hashem and send spies? Will you choose to be afraid to go into the land of Israel and own your own destiny? Or will you choose to let go and let Hashem run the show. As Yaakov was closing his eyes, he wanted nothing more than to tell his sons, and by extension, all the Jewish people, he wanted to tell them the truth. The truth is, my dear friends, Yaakov wanted to tell his sons, you guys will decide. And never underestimate the power of your own decision. Jewish history is in the palm of your hands. The decisions you make, whether you see yourselves as slaves of Paroi or slaves of Hashem, whether you see yourselves as a free people or not, whether you see yourselves as trusting in Hashem or whether you choose to be cowardly or afraid, this is not just a psychological decision. This has epic ramifications in terms of the destiny of the Jewish people. What will happen to the Jews? Will they languish in Golus for 3,500 years? Or will they leave Mitzrayim as free men with their arms raised and go straight into Eretz Yisrael and live there eternally? Yaakov wanted to tell his children, you will decide when Mashiach comes. It's up to you. He wanted to tell them that if they did not choose wisely, if they did not choose right, if they squandered the opportunities, they could, God forbid, end up in a 3,500 year Golus. But that they had the power to change that. Yaakov wanted to tell all of this to his sons, and by extension to the Jewish people. We can understand why Yaakov wanted to tell this to his children. What an incredibly empowering message. And Hashem stopped him. Hashem said no. Hashem said, you're going to tell your children nothing of that sort. You'll bless them. You'll wish them well. You'll give them your final word. You'll express your belief and your confidence in them, but you're not going to tell them what's going to happen in the future. Not one alternative, not two alternatives, not one possibility, not six possibilities, nothing. You'll keep all that information to yourself. Why? Why did Hashem not want Yaakov to tell this to his children? It seems like, looking back, it seems like the most important lesson the Jewish people could have ever heard. Hashem said no. Why not? Why did Hashem not want Yaakov to tell this to his children? Open your hearts, my dear friends. Hashem said certain lessons, certain teachings, certain values, and certain things we learn in life. The only way to truly learn them is to master them on your own. Hashem told Yaakov, you're a master communicator. You have your son's attention. You're on your deathbed. They'll take everything you say so seriously. They'll live by it for the rest of their lives. You want to show the children, you want to show your sons the repercussions of their actions. You want to tell them, if you choose this, this is what's going to happen. If you choose that, that's what's going to happen. Hashem said, that's not the way. Hashem said, you want to teach your children, you want to tell them that if they choose freedom, this is how they'll live. And if they choose slavery, that's how they'll live. Hashem said, that's not freedom. And that's not slavery. You have to put your children on a path where they make their own decisions. Not, God forbid, their own wrong decisions, but they're empowered to make their own decisions. And they go through it and they struggle with it on their own. And if they need to make the wrong decision 100 times until they're ready to make the right decision, then that's a process that they have to go through. And then when they'll make the right decision, they'll make it because they understand and they've reached a level of internalizing it within themselves. And then it'll be theirs. Hashem told Yaakov, you're going to have to do the most difficult and painful thing any parent ever has to do when it comes to the education of their child. Once you've done your best, you have to let go. And then you have to hope and pray that everything you taught the child and your son and your daughter will guide them and empower them into teaching them to make their own decisions as they stand on their own 2 feet. Hashem said to Yaakov, I'm not going to allow you lay out for your children the options of how Jewish history will evolve. I'm not going to let you tell your children what's going to happen tomorrow and not what's going to happen the next day and not what's going to happen when the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim and not what's going to happen when the Jewish people are in the desert and not what's going to happen when the Jewish people go into Eretz Yisrael. I'm not going to let you tell your children what's going to happen in the future. Because every human being and every Jew has to make the decision today based on what we know today without knowing the future. And if the decision we make today without knowing the future is the wrong decision, then we have the opportunity to fix it tomorrow and to fix it the next day. We have to struggle with this until we get it right. Hashem said to Yaakov, if you tell your children the future, if you tell your children what will happen to them, if you tell your children how things will pan out, then for the rest of their lives, they'll hear your Yaakov's voice in their head ringing, threatening them, telling them, do this and don't do that, go here and don't go there. This will happen if you choose it like this, and that will happen if you choose it like that. Hashem said, you're a master teacher, you're fantastic. But at some point, the student needs to graduate, no matter who his teacher is. The student has to leave school. The student has to grow up and become independent. I want to see a deeper growth. I want to see deeper greatness in the Jewish people, says Hashem to Yaakov. I want to see them become a people who don't just live, who are not just following a roadmap that somebody else gave them. I want them to make their own roadmap. I want them to learn to master their own decisions. And I want them to develop an appreciation for this without knowing, because they've been told by a holy tzaddik what tomorrow is going to bring. You know what it's kind of like? It's kind of like sometimes, not sure if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes people come to you in life and they ask you for your advice. What should I do in this particular situation? And you tell the person exactly what it is that they need to do. And you ask them, do you understand what I just said? And they said yes. And you say to them, repeat back to me, what did I just advise you? And they repeat your advice back to you perfectly and beautifully. And then they go out and they do the exact opposite. And it's so incredibly frustrating. Why don't you listen to me? Why didn't you listen to what I told you? If you had listened to me, you would not have fallen to this pit. You wouldn't have knocked your head against this wall over and over again. Listen to me. But Hashem made us as human beings in such a way where we don't want to and we're not capable living our entire lives following somebody else's instructions. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, do I truly believe in this? Is this really me? Or not? Yes, of course, we all need hadracha. Yes, of course, we all need direction. Yes, of course, we all need guidance. Yes, of course, we all need advice. But at some point, we need to ask ourselves, is this something that I buy into myself? Is this something that I choose or not? At some point, we need to empower our students to be able to make the right choices, even when we are not there to tell them the repercussions of their actions. We need to not give them fish, but we need to teach them how to fish. And Hashem said to Yaakov, I'm not going to let you map out the rest of Jewish history until the coming of Mashiach for your children, because then there's no room for your children to develop any independence at all. What will they choose? At which point will they feel that they themselves are truly mastering their own destiny in the sense that they have what to discover? What will there be left for your children to uncover if you've told them everything that will happen in all of Jewish history until the coming of Mashiach and beyond? What's left for them to do? Just spend the rest of their existence following your instructions? Hashem said, Jews don't like to spend their lives following someone else's instructions, no matter how valuable it is. To quote the Gemara says, Adam roitze bekav shaloi mitisha kabim shel chaveri. A person prefers one measure of his own, one measure which is mine, which I've truly earned, which I've truly creatively produced, even if I had to fail 9 times in order to achieve it. I'd rather that than somebody else give it to me. It's worth more to me, and I appreciate it. People in life are prepared to pay a very heavy price in order to truly feel like they make a difference, like they are relevant, like we're here to make an impact, and the choices we make are significant. Even when it comes to being freedom, the greatest irony of freedom is that you can never truly give anybody freedom. If you give somebody freedom, you're just in effect making them your slave. Freedom is something we have to choose and believe in and fight for. And so Hashem turns to Yaakov and says, I'll tell you, Yaakov, when Mashiach is going to come. The information you're going to give your children is wrong. I will tell you, Yaakov, the truth. I will tell you when Mashiach is going to come. You know when Mashiach is going to come? The day the Jewish people stand up and say, we are Jews. We own our destiny. We know what we have to do. We know why Hashem put us in this world. We trust in Hashem. We fear nothing and no one. We were never Paro's slaves. We were never Haman's slaves. We were never Achashverosh's slaves. The day Jews decide to live and be and exercise their existence as Jews to its fullest capacity, that's the day Mashiach is going to come. Not the day they hear some fancy threat or promise from their great-grandfather Yaakov Avinu, no matter how holy it is. The day the Jews decide to stand up and own their own Torah and truly take possession with pride, with positivity, with optimism. The day the Jews stand up and say, this is our Torah, we're afraid of nothing and no one. The day the Jews learn to get along with each other and do this as one nation, that's the day Mashiach is going to come. The day the student is ready to take everything he's learned from his teacher and become independently qualified to exercise it. That's the day Mashiach is going to come. And for that, Hashem says to Yaakov, it's not necessary for you to give them one more speech or one more threat or one more lesson or one more shiur or it's like one better way of giving you my advice. The advice has already been given. Hashem says to Yaakov, you've already told it to your children. You've said it to them over and over again. Even on Yaakov's deathbed, his children declared to him, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. They said, listen, Yaakov, we all believe in one Hashem. Yaakov's son says to him, we all believe in one Hashem. Hashem says to Yaakov, now it's time for you, Yaakov the teacher, to, so to speak, leave the classroom. The students have told you that they believe your lesson. Let's see if they live it. Let's see how successful they are at manifesting it in their everyday lives. Let's see how they will use this belief that they have when they have to face Mitzrayim and Paray and live the daily grind. That's going to determine if and when, not if, but when Mashiach will come. And if the Jews need to spend time in Golus in order to truly master this, just like if a person needs to make mistakes on their own, in order to develop and master their own ability, in order to develop their own ability to master something, then they themselves will tell you, it was worthwhile for me to get it wrong until I learned to get it right. Then the Jewish people will go through the same spiritual journey until they're ready. If you listen to people who've been successful in life, in just about any area, in any field, if you listen to them when they speak, they almost always say exactly the same thing. They almost always say how at one stage in their life, they felt like they had lost everything. They felt like they were down on their luck. They felt like they didn't know where to turn. They felt like all the wisdom they had accumulated and everything they had learned was not helping them. And they felt at one point in their life like failure was inevitable and there was nothing for them to do. And when all was lost, they reached deep, deep into themselves. They reached deep into their own hearts, into their own neshamas. And there they discovered a truth and a source of energy that they knew was always there. And there they discovered the answer. And that, above all, was the turning point in their life. And Hashem said to Yaakov, the same is going to happen with your children. You are going to let go. And the Jewish people, your sons, the ones you've educated and taught, the tzaddikim, are going to have children. And their children will have children. And an entire Jewish nation will evolve and develop. And at some point, every Jew is going to have to look at himself in the mirror and decide once and for all that the neshama, the Yiddish neshama, the source of energy, the connection to Hashem that I have is in me, and it is so deep and it is so powerful that it is inextinguishable and it is eternal. And it is one in all of us, and we're all in this together. And at that point, please God, the Jewish people will be ready for Mashiach. There's a part to this, Hashem says, that the Jews have to discover on their own. Very difficult for an educator, a good educator, a parent, a good parent. Very difficult to watch your student and your child stumble and fail and fall over and over again. Very difficult. But sometimes it's the greatest gift, because it's the only way the child and the student can truly ever come to learn and understand all the wisdom that they've been taught. And so here we are 3,500 years later, please God, hopefully, truly, finally ready. After all we've been through and after all we've suffered. Perhaps now, finally and truly, we're ready, or in some ways more ready than ever before in Jewish history, please God. May Hashem help us that as we study this parsha of the end of Yaakov's life and how much he wanted, how much more he wanted to give his children, how much more he wanted to teach them. And Hashem's lesson to him that sometimes less is more. Sometimes not saying is deeper than saying. Hashem told Yaakov, you've done everything you can and everything you should for your children. You've planted it within them, now let it grow. May Hashem bless us all. That now that we're finally here, please God, may this be the end. May this be the end of Golus, the beginning of Gula. May everything invested in us by our ancestors, by our holy forebears, come to fruition. May the Jewish people suffer no longer and no more. May we be reunited with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, with Yosef and all the brothers. And Yaakov, as soon as he comes up, will probably take one look at us and go, my God, what in heaven's name took you people so long? But as he looks at us, it is our wish that he'll get tremendous nachas, because through it all, we remain dedicated and we remain committed. We never lost focus and we never lost hope and we never lost our courage. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful, sweet New Year.